Okay, I'm going to start a hope that this is getting captured by YouTube. It looks like it's live, but it also said it was failing. So I don't know the answer to that. We will see. Hopefully it records. Okay, guys, any questions or concerns before I get going with this stuff? It should be pretty short and sweet today. There's about 10 slides left, I think. We will wrap this stuff up today. And then next week, there will be no class. So you'll have time to spend it reviewing a little bit or whatever it is you want to do. Probably not think biology, but I would hope you think about biology a little bit. Okay. So we left off, well, we were talking about some invasive species and things like that. And we talked about the white nose fungus, the invasive species before, and then the white nose fungus, and some details about that and potentials that we see impacting all sorts of other things. It's more than just a problem with bats. This image is something that, you can see all sorts of images that try to show the impact of climate change over the course of decades, potentially. And this really kind of puts some stuff into perspective as we look at this sort of time-lapse photography from going back to 1938. This image shows, and it's all hopefully kind of about the same area as or viewpoint as we're looking at this. You could see massive amounts of glacier, and all of this, although it's black and white, is a huge ice sheet, part of the glacier. And this is in Glacier National Park, Grinnell Glacier. In 1981, you can still see the glacier and a big chunk of it right here, but a lake starting to form. As we progress, considerably more of that melting and receding away. And we're seeing this in all sorts of areas, polar caps that are receding dramatically. And NASA has some pretty disturbing images that shows this occurring. So here we can see, since about 1900, the temperature in Glacier National Park increasing by about 1 1/3 degrees Celsius, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's sufficient enough to lend to what we are visualizing right now. There are all sorts of concerns with what we may think of as a subtle temperature increase, but it's more than that, right? So we see impacts like this with receding glaciers causing issues with losing some of the meltwaters. We see results of greater evaporation and other situations. This decreases, water supply and impacts the ecosystems. There are numerous other examples that show some similar circumstances with this. We think about with impacts like human encroachment into habitat or population growth to set the stage for potential problems at an ecosystem level. And as we look at this image, it's going clear back millions of years back in time, looking at extinction rates or levels, and we can see some big extinctions as we move through here through the fossil record. So we can see big losses in diversity, some mass extinctions, at least 5. Although we see back here, there's some other bits that look pretty disturbing as we see this. But these at the ends of a handful of these periods, we see some big issues, extinction rates that are more than what we would just call background extinction, right? Extinction occurs, right? And background extinction rates are very low toward the x-axis as we see the dips in all of these little valleys, more background-like, right? And as we see these bars shooting way up past that, these are levels far above what would just be normal expectations. Species don't persist for forever. We think about change in environment that initiates this. We think about adaptation and evolution that lends for species to be modified and change over the course of time as well, as they possibly adapt to these given conditions. However, if they, for one reason or another, lack those capabilities, they're unable to adapt and change, then they typically go by the wayside. So issues for sure. And we see the declines in biodiversity with these massive. On the other hand, as we see this, there are also potentials with these reductions where it opens up the stage for adaptive radiations. And as one example with this one here at the end of the Cretaceous, this is a mass extinction that basically wipes out the dinosaurs. And as we see this, it sets the stage for habitat to ultimately be opened up to things like little fuzzy mammals. And it sets the stage for massive adaptive radiations and change. So I don't want to say that mass extinctions are good, but there are some potentials where it kind of wipes the slate clean and lets other things potentially have that opportunity, right? As we look at this and we see it right here at 0, thinking this must be today, and these look very, very low, that's truly misleading. And if we were to look at instances, data that shows extinction rates, we would see a very high peak as well. There are many that speculate right now. We are in the process of a 6th mass extinction, right? That oftentimes might be hard to perceive when you're right in the middle of it, right? It's hard to recognize that occurring. So we do see big losses that truly kind of indicate that situation. Lots of organisms that have extinction rates much higher than what we would speculate as background. And those impacts, well, that's yet to really be seen. There are numerous things that we can recognize as extinction events, like this example with the dodo, hunted to extinction in 1600s. And ultimately these, dodos, these flightless birds, had no clue of any sort of human interactions. And as we come upon these guys, they were basically easy prey. From what I gather, as it says, hunted to extinction, apparently not too tasty, but still decimated. And there are numerous other examples where we can see situations like this where no longer present. Typically, when we think about saying something is extinct, you have no record or ability to find whatever it is. If I remember correctly, it's 50 years that it's unable to be seen. And then you can say they truly are extinct. With that said, there have been a few species, some birds, that were said to be extinct to ultimately be rediscovered. And so sometimes maybe there's a little wiggle room with that. As we look at this, and as I was scrolling through this right before I started, I was like, I should have probably brought a couple of different examples into this, because this, I mean, it's okay, but I think there's some others that maybe would do it a little bit better. So as we look at this figure, we've got a forest area on the x-axis in square kilometers, and we've got the number of species going up on the y-axis. This is kind of just an arbitrary, as we look at it, hypothetical, but we're looking at the number of species found over a specific area. And I think it kind of makes sense. If you have greater area, if you have bigger habitat, bigger range, you've got a greater opportunity to harbor more organisms, all right? So more can be there. And with habitat destruction and habitat loss, which is really what we're kind of looking at here, as we reduce the amount of area that's available, there is a dramatic reduction in the amount of species that can persist, all right? Chopping it in about half, all right? And then there are issues with this where we see that and we're like, well, we can reduce this this area by 90% and we only lose 50%. Maybe that's okay, right? I think that's maybe not a good idea. What if you're one of those 50%, right? I think that's an issue, right? How do you pick and choose what gets saved and what is able to be lost, right? Those are issues for sure, right? So as we see this curve, it definitely gives some perspective as to habitats, the potential for destruction and for restoration, because that's also a big factor when we think about this. Just because the habitat has potentially been altered doesn't mean that it can't potentially go back and lend to reintroductions within that habitat. There are possibilities with that, and conservation ecology definitely focuses on those aspects and thinking about this and what sorts of potentials it might hold. This is a good one. This is, almost right in our backyard. There are numerous national parks, and Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming is one that, at least, like I said, right in our backyard, definitely holds promise when we think about conserving biodiversity. We talked about the littlest bit, and I'll show you on an image here, next slide or two, about a few of these hot spots for biodiversity. I wouldn't say this is necessarily a hot spot, but there is a lot of biodiversity. When we think about reserves or preserves, national parks, it's habitat that is ensuring that it will be there for future generations, that lends to this population or this diversity of populations to have that habitat, relatively untouched. Although as we think about stuff like Yellowstone National Park, the amounts of people going there definitely have an impact. And post-COVID, we're still COVID. But this last summer, there were mass quantities of people trying to get out and do things. And Yellowstone saw record numbers. So too did Grand Teton National Park. And those impacts need to be evaluated as well. What sorts of factors do we play with this diversity? I think it's pretty interesting. Kind of wish the clouds were gone so you could see the Tetons back there, but that's okay. They're there. You can sometimes get a glimpse of them from from around here, really more towards Idaho Falls. You can start seeing it a little bit. So here's the image. What's the next slide? The image that talks about some of these diversity hotspots. We talked about Madagascar last time, I think it was, and some of the potentials with this and habitat destruction changing within there. But these red areas are the hotspots. There are some that we've got kind of color coded as far as what's happening here, but the red are the more concerns for preservation to ensure kind of this idea, right? Giving them ample resources and space to ensure that we can maintain the diversity. So all of these little spots really make up just a fraction of the surface, but 42% of the terrestrial vertebrates and 50% of the plants are found within these hotspots. And so definitely, as we think about that, it sets the stage for efforts to ensure that these special habitats are preserved. So we can see all sorts of potentials and possibilities with that. And a good chunk of it, we can also see near equatorial regions, parts of the Amazon that are yet to be tapped into. Here we've got an image from Yellowstone, another backyard, showing wolf pack. These wolves were reintroduced, and ultimately we talked, I can't remember, before the break, I'm pretty sure, talking about different types of keystone species, and we mentioned wolves in Yellowstone as a potential. These are top predators. There are other predators in the park as well, but the wolves truly play a key role in keeping the populations of other animals, like elk in particular, in check. And they recognized with the removal of the wolves in the very early 1900s that the habitat was changing. It was being altered. Things were happening there, and it took decades to truly recognize why. And the answer was wolves. As they were removed, things spiraled out of control. And I described some of this stuff before with elk populations surging. They start feeding on all sorts of vegetation in greater proportions than they were before because their populations are considerably larger. That in turn reduces the amount of resources for other animals, and in turn impacts vegetation where young saplings get killed as a result of them basically mowing it all down. And that has impacts in the forest in general. So with their reintroduction, we've seen it bouncing back, coming back into more of this equilibrium, this normalcy that it once had is coming back, right? And the populations of wolves are also thriving. Whether that is good or bad for an Idaho rancher is truly up in the air, I suppose. And I believe last but not least, we're right at the end. That is super quick. We should talk, I should talk just super slow. So zoos and captive breeding programs, these are important when we think about trying to deal with species that are endangered. Potentially habitats have been decimated and their potentials to truly be successful have been minimized. And so captive breeding programs help to ensure that these species get preserved. There are definitely issues with some of this where there are difficulties in some instances with these breeding programs where it's difficult to get these animals to mate. It really kind of depends, right? on the circumstances. But we do see some of these circumstances where populations are able to rebound. There are other possibilities, as we think about like some of the genetics, and we don't want to go clear back to the start of the semester as we're talking DNA and all of that stuff. But we've mentioned things like being homozygous or heterozygous, having same copies of those genes or two different copies of those genes. And when we see species whose populations are declining, who are in the process of becoming endangered or going extinct, oftentimes the genetics in these small populations, they are very similar. So lots of homozygous genes, lots of the same copies. And that sets the stage for a potential disaster for these organisms, whatever they might be, maybe lack the variation needed for change or adaptation, and it drives them even closer to extinction. Oftentimes we call that an extinction vortex as they spiral downward, and we see other issues with very small populations where the level of inbreeding is increased. So there's a lot of relatedness with that, and that helps to focus those specific bad genes and create more homozygosity, more of the same copies. And you continue to spiral downward. So through these captive breeding programs, there are potentials to try to minimize some of that. If you can bring genes from one area to another and breed these together, it potentially creates some variation, creates some heterozygosity that may confer some advantages to these populations, right? There are other circumstances where you may not have that capability. You may only have one population, so you can't pull in from outside and try to increase diversity. And in those circumstances, there's greater concern. Okay, I think that's all I've got for you. Do you guys, any questions or concerns now? Oh, and my YouTube worked, it looked like, thankfully. You don't need that. All right, it's been a good semester, guys. I will have stuff posted on Moodle. It's listed in the syllabus. I don't remember when this is the final is supposed to happen, but it will be open for a window of time. It won't just be one day, right? So you'll have a little more time with it, and a handful of extra questions. Like I said before, once I get this thing put together, I will let you guys know how many questions and sort of the format of that. If you've got questions or concerns, in the meantime, shoot me an email. I will be happy to help. With that said, thank you guys very much. I hope you have a great break. Farewell.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
We are not meeting.
No class next week?
No class next week.
It's like,
Closed week, dead week, whatever you want to call it. I finished lecture, so I don't have to keep lecturing, so that's good.
And then, so are we just gonna meet the week after for fun or just?
The week after for fun.
Well, I mean, like,
The week after is finals,
oh, okay.
right? So closed week, spend the time studying, and then finals, we're not meeting for finals,
All right.
okay? Yep, cheers. Thank
Enjoyed
you.
your class, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's still on 270, right? Scoring?
Right now, yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Nice.
Until, yeah, and then after, so there will be some more, but
Yeah.